The throne room of the Shadowmoon Pack reeked of power and barely contained violence. Maya clutched her two young children behind her as she knelt before the most feared werewolf in existence, Alpha King Darius Blackthorne, whose golden eyes could kill with a glance. Famine had ravaged the human settlements for months, and her babies were dying. She'd used stolen omega pheromones to mask her human scent, knowing it was the only way to get close enough to beg. "Take my children, just feed them," she cried, her voice breaking as she pushed her trembling son and daughter forward. "I don't care what happens to me." But as Darius rose from his obsidian throne, his nostrils flared. The scent-masking spell was failing. Her human blood called to something primal in him, something that had been dormant for centuries. When he spoke, his voice was velvet wrapped around steel. "Not without you." Maya's heart stopped. He knew what she was. But why wasn't she dead? And why was the Monster King looking at her like she was his salvation instead of his prey? The silence stretched between them, like a taut wire ready to snap. Around the throne room, the Alpha King's most trusted advisors shifted restlessly, their wolf instincts detecting the tension crackling in the air. Maya could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel little Emma's tiny fingers clutching at her torn skirt, while 6-year-old Liam tried to be brave beside his sister, despite the tears streaming down his dirt-stained cheeks. Darius descended the marble steps with predatory grace, each footfall echoing through the cavernous chamber. He was enormous, easily 7 feet of pure muscle wrapped in midnight black leather and ancient power. His dark hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing the sharp angles of his face and those unnerving golden eyes that seemed to burn straight through to her soul. Everything about him screamed danger, from the way shadows seemed to bend around his form to the barely leashed violence rippling beneath his skin. Maya forced herself not to flinch as he approached, though every human instinct screamed at her to run. She'd come too far to give up now. The memory of Liam's hollow cheeks and Emma's weak cries from hunger gave her strength. "You dare enter my territory under false pretenses," Darius said, his voice a low rumble that made the very air vibrate. "You reek of desperation and something else." He paused just feet away from her, inhaling deeply. "Human, female, unmated." The last word dropped like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled court. Maya heard several sharp intakes of breath, followed by the distinctive sound of claws extending from fingertips. "My king," came a gravelly voice from behind her. "Humans are forbidden in the sacred halls. The penalty is death." Maya's arms instinctively tightened around her children. Emma whimpered, and Liam pressed closer to his mother's side, his small body trembling like a leaf in a storm. But Darius held up one massive hand, silencing his advisor without taking his burning gaze off Maya. "Tell me your name." Maya," she whispered, hating how her voice cracked. "Maya Chen. And these are your cubs." The werewolf terminology for her children should have sounded wrong, but somehow it didn't. "My son Liam and my daughter Emma. They're innocent. They've done nothing wrong. Please, I'm begging you, let them live." Something flickered across the Alpha King's face, an emotion too quick to identify. "How long since they've eaten?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected threats, violence, immediate execution. Not concern. 3 days, maybe 4. I lost track. A muscle in Darius's jaw twitched. Without warning, he dropped to one knee, bringing himself closer to the children's eye level. Emma shrank back with a tiny cry, but Liam, brave, stubborn Liam, lifted his chin and met the Alpha King's stare with surprising defiance. "You protect your mother," Darius observed, and there was something almost approving in his tone. "She protects us," Liam replied, his voice barely above a whisper but steady. "Always." Darius's golden eyes shifted back to Maya, and she felt the weight of his scrutiny like a physical force. "You would sacrifice yourself for their survival." It wasn't a question, but Maya nodded anyway, without hesitation. "And what makes you think I would want your children but not you?" The question was so unexpected that Maya blinked in confusion. I don't understand." Darius rose to his full height again, towering over her kneeling form. When he spoke, his words carried the unmistakable ring of authority, a royal decree that would not be challenged. You will all remain here. Your children will be fed, clothed, and protected. You, Maya Chen, will explain to me how a human mother managed to acquire omega pheromones and infiltrate the most secure stronghold in the supernatural realm. Before Maya could respond, he turned to his stunned court. Prepare the Rose Tower. Our guests will need suitable accommodations. The Alpha King's golden eyes bore into her with an intensity that made Lyra's breath catch in her throat. She could feel the weight of his scrutiny, as if he could peel away every layer of deception she had carefully constructed. The throne room fell silent except for the crackling of torches mounted along the stone walls, their flames casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock her predicament. You reek of desperation, he said, his voice a low rumble that reverberated through the vast chamber, and something else. His nostrils flared slightly, and Lyra's heart hammered against her ribcage. The suppressants she had taken were strong, but not foolproof. If he discovered what she truly was— Please, Your Majesty, she whispered, forcing her voice to remain steady. My children are dying. The harvest failed, and the winter has been cruel. I have nothing left to offer except my service. King Darius rose from his throne, his massive frame unfolding with predatory grace. Each step he took toward her echoed through the hall, and Lyra fought every instinct, screaming at her to run. She had heard the stories, how he had claimed the throne through blood and brutality, how his wolf was said to be larger and more vicious than any other, how he had never taken a mate, preferring to remain unbound by such weaknesses. Your service, he repeated, stopping mere inches from where she knelt. The heat radiating from his body was overwhelming, carrying with it the scent of pine and winter storms. And what makes you think I have need of another Omega servant? My castle is already well staffed. The lie burned on her tongue, but Lyra forced herself to maintain the charade. I am skilled in healing arts, Your Majesty. I can read and write. I will work without complaint, sleep wherever you command, eat only what scraps remain. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, the very real desperation bleeding through her performance. His hand shot out suddenly, fingers gripping her chin and forcing her to meet his gaze. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system, and she saw his eyes narrow in response. Look at me when you speak, Omega. I despise cowering. Lyra's breath hitched as she stared into those molten gold depths. There was intelligence there, cunning that spoke of a mind constantly calculating, weighing threats and opportunities. But there was something else, a loneliness so profound it made her chest ache in recognition. How old are your children? The question caught her off guard with its gentleness. 7 and 5, Your Majesty. A boy and a girl. The truth came easier now, her love for them evident in every syllable. They are good children, quiet and obedient. They won't cause trouble if you allow them into the servants' quarters. Something flickered across his features, surprise perhaps, or calculation. You would bring them here? To my court? I would bring them anywhere that meant they wouldn't starve. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, raw and honest. I would go anywhere, do anything to keep them alive. Darius released her chin but didn't step back, his presence still overwhelming her senses. Anything? The word carried dangerous implications, and Lyra felt heat creep up her neck despite the chill in the air. Yes, she whispered, because it was true. She would sacrifice everything for Mira and Thomas. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an odd note of curiosity. What is your name? Lyra, Your Majesty. She had considered lying, but her real name was common enough not to draw suspicion. Lyra. The way he said it sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. Tell me, Lyra, what village do you come from? I want to verify your story. Panic fluttered in her chest, but she had prepared for this. Millbrook, Your Majesty. 3 days' journey south through the mountains. The village was real, though she had never lived there. It was also small enough that verifying specific details would be difficult. Millbrook. He turned and walked back toward his throne, his movements fluid and controlled. Captain Aldrich will escort you to the servants' quarters. You will be given food and clothing. Tomorrow we will discuss the terms of your service in more detail. Relief flooded through her so suddenly that Lyra swayed slightly. Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed began to blur her vision. Do not thank me yet, Darius said, settling back into his throne. I am not known for my mercy. If you prove useful, you and your children will be fed and housed. If you disappoint me, he let the threat hang in the air, unfinished but unmistakably clear. I won't disappoint you, Lyra promised, though she wondered how long she could maintain her deception in the heart of his domain. The Alpha King's private chambers were nothing like Lyra had imagined. Where she expected cold stone and intimidating displays of power, she found warmth. Rich tapestries depicting forest scenes, a crackling fireplace, and furniture that invited comfort rather than fear. The scent of pine and something distinctly masculine filled the air, making her wolf stir restlessly beneath her carefully constructed disguise. Kieran moved through the space with fluid grace, pouring amber liquid from a crystal decanter into 2 glasses. His earlier intensity had shifted into something more controlled, though no less dangerous. When he turned to face her, offering one of the glasses, Lyra noticed how the firelight caught the gold flecks in his dark eyes. Drink, he commanded softly. You're trembling. She was. The adrenaline from their encounter in the throne room was finally catching up with her, leaving her hands unsteady. She accepted the glass, grateful for something to do with her nervous energy. The whiskey burned as it went down, but it helped steady her racing heart. Tell me about your children, Kieran said, settling into the chair across from her. He'd shed his formal jacket, and the simple white shirt revealed the powerful lines of his shoulders and chest. Their ages, their names. The request caught her off guard. She'd expected interrogation about her pack allegiances or demands for political information. Instead, he wanted to know about Emma and Thomas. Emma is 7, she began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke of them. She's brave, perhaps too brave for her own good, always trying to take care of everyone else, even when she can barely stand from hunger. The image of her daughter's thin face swam before her eyes. Thomas is 5. He doesn't understand why there's never enough food. He keeps asking when Daddy is coming home. Something flickered across Kieran's features at the mention of her mate. Your husband? Dead, she said simply. The plague took him 18 months ago, along with most of our pack's leadership. We've been struggling ever since. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Lyra risked a glance at the Alpha King, surprised to find his expression thoughtful rather than calculating. You love them very much, he observed. More than my own life. The words came out fierce, protective. I would do anything for them. Anything, including deceiving an Alpha King in his own court. Heat flooded her cheeks. You said you could smell my desperation. Surely you understand. I understand desperation, Kieran interrupted, rising from his chair. He moved to the fireplace, one hand braced against the mantel as he stared into the flames. What I don't understand is why a mother would risk not just her own life, but her children's future on such a reckless gamble. Because the alternative was watching them waste away. Lyra stood as well, her earlier fear transforming into defiance. My pack has nothing left. Our crops failed, our stores are empty, and winter is coming. I heard the stories about you, about how you never show mercy, how you crush anyone who dares to challenge you. But I also heard whispers of your Omega protection laws, of the aid you provide to vulnerable pack members. So you thought to masquerade as an Omega and appeal to my protective instincts. I thought to save my children by any means necessary. Kieran turned back to her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. And what were you prepared to offer in return for this aid? Surely you didn't expect charity from the ruthless Alpha King? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Lyra's pulse quicken. She'd known this moment would come, had steeled herself for whatever price he might demand. "Whatever you require," she said quietly. "My service, my loyalty, my—" "Your what?" His voice was dangerously soft as he stepped closer. "Finish the thought." Lyra lifted her chin, meeting his stare directly. "Myself, if necessary. My children's lives are worth any sacrifice." Something dark and hungry flashed in Kieran's eyes. He moved closer still, until she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the faint scar along his jaw that spoke of past battles. "Careful, little wolf," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "You're offering something far more valuable than you realize to a man who takes what he wants and keeps what he claims." Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't step back. Couldn't, even if she'd wanted to. Something about his proximity, his scent, the raw power he emanated, called to parts of herself she'd kept buried since her mate's death. "Then we understand each other," she whispered. Kieran's hand rose to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. "Do we, I wonder?" The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, crackling with unspoken threats and dangerous possibilities. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared into those molten gold eyes, searching for any hint of mercy and finding none. The Alpha King's presence seemed to fill the entire chamber, pressing against her like a physical weight. "You didn't answer my question," Kyle said, his voice deceptively soft. He took another step closer, and Lyra caught his scent: pine, smoke, and something darker that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. "What pack do you belong to?" Lyra's mind raced. Every human settlement knew the basic pack names, but claiming allegiance to the wrong one could be her death sentence. I come from the northern borderlands," she whispered, choosing the most remote territory she could think of. "We keep to ourselves." The borderlands. His lips curved in what might have been amusement, but his eyes remained cold. "Those wolves are known for their distinctive scent markers. Funny how you smell of nothing but fear and desperation." Her blood turned to ice. Of course he would know. Alphas could read scent signatures like humans read books, detecting pack bonds, family ties, even emotional states. Her amateur disguise would never fool someone of his caliber. "My children," she said instead, clinging to the one truth that mattered. "Please, I've told you the truth about them. They're innocent. Whatever punishment you have for me—" "Punishment?" Kyle's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Who said anything about punishment?" He moved to the window, gazing out at his territory with the casual confidence of absolute power. The morning light caught the silver threading through his dark hair, and Lyra noticed the scars that crisscrossed his forearms, evidence of countless battles fought and won. "Do you know what I smell when I look at you?" he asked without turning around. "Courage, reckless, foolish courage. You walked into my stronghold knowing you could die, all for the sake of human children who aren't even your own blood." Lyra's breath caught. How could he possibly know that? "Your scent tells me everything," he continued, finally facing her again. "You've never given birth, never nursed a child, yet you speak of your children with such fierce protectiveness that you're willing to lie to the most powerful alpha in the realm." Tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. "They are mine," she whispered fiercely. "Maybe not by blood, but they're mine in every way that matters. I've fed them when they were hungry, held them when they cried, taught them to read and write when everyone else had given up on them. If that doesn't make me their mother, then the word has no meaning." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. For a moment, his expression softened, and she caught a glimpse of the man beneath the monster. And their real parents? Dead. The plague took them last winter. Their families abandoned them, said they were cursed. Her voice broke on the words. They were going to leave them in the forest to die. I couldn't let that happen." Kyle studied her for a long moment, his golden eyes unreadable. Then he moved to his desk, pulling out a piece of parchment and scratching something across it with quick, decisive strokes. This will provide enough supplies to feed 50 children for 3 months, he said, holding out the paper. My quartermaster will have everything ready within the hour. Lyra stared at him, hardly daring to believe it. Thank you. Thank you so much, But, he interrupted, and the word fell like a blade. There are conditions. Of course there were. Nothing came free, especially not from the Alpha King. What do you want? You will return here in 1 month's time. Alone. No disguises, no lies, no games. His eyes bored into hers. You will tell me the truth about what you are and why a creature with your particular abilities is living among humans instead of claiming her rightful place in a pack. My abilities? Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Did you think I couldn't sense it? The power you're suppressing? He moved closer again, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You're not just any wolf, little liar. You're something much more interesting than that. Lyra's mouth went dry. She'd been so careful, so cautious about hiding her true nature, but apparently not careful enough. And if I refuse to come back? His smile was all teeth and promise. Then I'll come looking for you. And I assure you, you won't enjoy that conversation nearly as much as this one. The parchment crinkled in her trembling fingers as she clutched it to her chest. She had what she'd come for, but the price was higher than she'd ever imagined. Not her life, something far more dangerous, her secrets. The Alpha King's private chambers were nothing like Lyra had imagined. Where she expected cold stone and harsh edges, she found warmth. Rich tapestries depicting ancient forests, a crackling fireplace, and furniture carved from dark wood that seemed to pulse with life. The scent of cedar and rain lingered in the air, mixing with something uniquely him that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. She stood frozen near the doorway, acutely aware of how out of place she looked in her threadbare dress among such luxury. Kyle moved through the space with predatory grace, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter before turning those piercing golden eyes back to her. Sit, he commanded, gesturing to a chair near the fire. Lyra's legs obeyed before her mind could protest. The heat from the flames felt foreign against her skin. It had been so long since she'd been truly warm. She watched warily as Kyle settled into the chair across from her, his massive frame somehow making the large seat appear small. Your children, he said without preamble. Tell me about them. The question caught her off guard. She'd expected interrogation about her deception, not this. Her voice cracked. Maya is 7. She loves to draw pictures in the dirt with sticks. She hasn't smiled in weeks. The words tumbled out despite her caution. And Thomas is 5. He tries to be brave, tells me he's not hungry even when I can see his ribs through his shirt. Something flickered across Kyle's expression, too quick for her to interpret. Their father, dead. The lie came easier now, killed in a territorial dispute 3 years ago. Yet, you didn't seek help from his pack. Lyra's hands clenched in her lap. Each question felt like stepping through a minefield. We were cast out. They said we were a burden they couldn't afford. It wasn't entirely false. Her former pack had cast her out, though the reasons were far more complex than she could ever reveal. How could she explain that she'd been the daughter of their beta, trained as a warrior, only to lose everything when she'd refused an arranged mating that would have secured their alliance with a neighboring pack? Kyle leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. The movement brought him closer, and she caught more of that intoxicating scent that seemed to cloud her thoughts. Look at me, Lyra. Her name on his lips sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. She forced herself to meet his gaze, those golden eyes seeming to see straight through every carefully constructed wall she'd built. You're not telling me everything, he said softly, but there was steel beneath the silk of his voice. I've told you what matters. She lifted her chin, drawing on reserves of strength she'd almost forgotten she possessed. My children are starving. That's the only truth that counts. A smile ghosted across his lips, not cruel, but amused in a way that made her stomach flutter. Brave little wolf, even disguised as an omega, you have fire. The observation hit too close to home. Lyra fought to keep her expression neutral, even as panic clawed at her chest. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" He stood then, moving with that fluid predator's grace to the window. Moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, highlighting the strength in his jaw and the calculating intelligence in his eyes. "I can smell the warrior in you, Lyra. It's faint, buried deep beneath whatever concoction you've been using to mask your true scent. But it's there." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "You're mistaken." "Am I?" He turned back to her, and she saw something dangerous spark in his expression. "Stand up." "What?" "Stand up." The alpha command rolled through his voice, and her body responded without conscious thought. She rose from the chair, trembling but unable to resist. Kyle circled her slowly, like a predator studying prey. "The way you hold yourself, even terrified, you don't cower. Your spine stays straight, your chin stays up." He paused behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "That's not Omega conditioning, little wolf." His breath stirred the hair at her nape, sending goosebumps racing across her skin. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting against the conflicting urges to run or sink into his overwhelming presence. "What I can't determine," he continued, moving to face her again, "is whether you're a beta trying to pass for Omega, or something else entirely." Lyra forced herself to look at him, drawing on every acting skill she'd developed over the past 3 years. "Does it matter? Will you help my children or not?" For a long moment, they stared at each other in tense silence. Then Kyle smiled, a slow, predatory curve of lips that made her knees weak. "Oh, I'll help them," he said quietly. "But you, Lyra, have become far more interesting than a simple plea for aid." The morning light filtered through the ornate windows of Lyra's chambers, casting golden patterns across the marble floor. She had barely slept, her mind churning over Kyle's words from the night before. The memory of his touch, gentle yet possessive, lingered on her skin like a brand she couldn't wash away. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting another silent servant. Instead, a woman entered, tall, elegant, with silver-streaked auburn hair and eyes that held the same piercing intensity as Kyle's. The resemblance was unmistakable, yet where the Alpha King commanded through raw power, this woman's authority was refined, subtle but no less absolute. "You must be Lyra," the woman said, her voice cultured and measured. "I am Queen Mother Ilara. We need to talk." Lyra's stomach dropped. She stood quickly, offering a clumsy bow. "Your Majesty, I—" "Sit." Ilara's tone brooked no argument. She settled gracefully into the chair opposite Lyra's, her gaze never wavering. "My son has made some rather interesting decisions lately. You seem to be at the center of them." Heat crept up Lyra's neck. "I never intended for any of this." "Oh, I'm certain you didn't." Ilara's lips curved in what might have been amusement. "Tell me, child, what exactly do you think you're doing here?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Lyra chose her words carefully. "I came to ask for help for my children. That's all." Ilara studied her with unsettling intensity. "And yet you've managed to capture my son's attention in a way no one has before. Kyle has never claimed an Omega, never shown interest in taking a mate beyond political necessity." Lyra's hands clenched in her lap. "I don't understand what he wants from me." "Don't you?" Ilara leaned forward slightly. "You're not naive, despite what you'd have us believe. You've survived as a human mother in the borderlands. That requires intelligence, cunning, strength. You know exactly what my son wants." The truth of it hit Lyra like a physical blow. She did know, had known from the moment Kyle's eyes had darkened when he'd scented her deception, when he'd pinned her against the wall and demanded she submit. The Alpha King wanted to claim her, wholly and completely. The question was whether she could afford to let him. "My children are safe and well-fed, I'm told." Ilara's voice gentled slightly. "Kyle may be many things, but he honors his word. However, you should know that his patience has limits." A chill ran down Lyra's spine. What do you mean? Before Ilara could answer, the door burst open. Kyle strode in, his presence immediately filling the room with barely contained energy. His gaze flicked between Lyra and his mother, his jaw tightening. "Mother, what brings you here?" "Curiosity," Ilara replied smoothly, rising to her feet. "I wanted to meet the woman who's managed to shake the foundations of your carefully ordered world." Kael's eyes darkened dangerously. "This doesn't concern you. Everything that affects the crown concerns me." Ilara moved toward the door, pausing beside her son. "Don't let pride make you foolish, Kyle. Some prizes are worth the cost of patience." She left them alone, the silence stretching taut between them. Kael's attention fixed on Lyra with an intensity that made her want to flee. "What did she say to you?" Lyra stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "That you want to claim me." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, that she'd spoken so directly. And I don't understand why." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I'm nobody. A desperate mother who lied to you, who has nothing to offer." "Nothing?" In 2 strides he was before her, his hands framing her face. "You think you have nothing to offer?" His thumb traced her cheekbone, and she had to fight not to lean into the touch. "You stood before me knowing you could die for your deception, and you didn't back down. You faced the full force of my anger and didn't break. You're fierce and protective and beautiful, and you think that's nothing?" Lyra's breath caught. "Kael, I've been surrounded by submission my entire life," he continued, his voice rough. "Courtiers who agree with everything I say, nobles who kowtow for favor, omegas who present themselves like offerings. But you challenge me, question me, make me feel something other than the weight of duty and power." His confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. Lyra saw past the Alpha King's mask to the man beneath, lonely, burdened, hungry for something real in a world of political games and false smiles. "I can't be what you need," she whispered. "You already are." His forehead touched hers. "The question is whether you'll let yourself believe it." The weight of choice settled on her shoulders, heavy as a crown she'd never sought to wear. The Alpha King's private chambers were nothing like Elena had imagined. Where she expected cold stone and harsh edges, she found warmth. Rich tapestries depicting ancient pack histories, shelves lined with leather-bound books, and a fire crackling softly in an ornate hearth. The scent of cedar and something distinctly masculine filled the space, making her wolf stir restlessly beneath her carefully constructed facade. Lucian moved with fluid grace as he poured amber liquid from a crystal decanter. His massive frame seemed almost too large for the refined setting, yet he belonged here completely. Power radiated from him even in this moment of apparent calm, and Elena found herself studying the way firelight played across his sharp features. "You're staring," he said without turning around, amusement threading through his deep voice. Heat flooded Elena's cheeks. "I was merely observing, Your Majesty. These chambers are unexpected." He faced her then, extending a glass. "What did you expect? Skulls and chains?" Elena accepted the drink, careful not to let their fingers touch. Perhaps not skulls, but certainly not philosophy texts and poetry collections. A genuine smile tugged at his lips, the first she'd seen from him. It transformed his entire face, making him seem younger, less forbidding. "My tutors insisted on a well-rounded education. Even future kings, they claimed, needed to understand more than warfare and politics." "Wise tutors." Elena took a small sip, welcoming the liquid's warmth. "Though I imagine you didn't always appreciate their efforts." "I was a terror," Lucian admitted, settling into a chair across from her. "I wanted to train with the warriors, not conjugate verbs in dead languages." The casual confession surprised her. This wasn't the ruthless Alpha King of whispered legends, but simply a man sharing memories. Elena felt her carefully maintained walls beginning to crack. "And now? Now I understand their wisdom. A king who cannot think beyond brute force is no king at all." His golden eyes studied her intently. You understand this, don't you? There's more to you than appears on the surface. Elena's pulse quickened. Was this a test? Did he suspect? I'm not sure what you mean, Your Majesty. Lucian, he corrected softly, and I think you know exactly what I mean. Your reaction to the children's plight yesterday, the way you spoke to them, that wasn't mere kindness. That was the response of someone who truly understands their struggle. The trap was closing around her, but Elena couldn't retreat now. Many people have known hardship. True, but few would risk approaching me as you did. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me about your pack, Arya. Where do you come from? Elena's mind raced. She'd prepared for this question, crafted a careful story, but under his intense scrutiny, the lies felt flimsy. A small pack to the north. Nothing remarkable. Nothing remarkable, he repeated slowly. Yet you speak with education, carry yourself with confidence, and show no fear of an alpha king most wolves won't even look at directly. Fear serves no purpose, Elena replied honestly. And you saved those children. Whatever else you might be, you showed mercy when you didn't have to. Something shifted in his expression. Mercy isn't a quality usually attributed to me. Perhaps people only see what they expect to see. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither acknowledged directly. Elena realized she was leaning forward too, drawn into this dangerous intimacy despite every instinct screaming warnings. And what do you see? Lucian asked quietly. Elena looked at him, really looked. Past the intimidating presence and ruthless reputation, she saw intelligence, loneliness, and something that might have been vulnerability if she dared name it. I see someone who bears the weight of many burdens. He was quiet for a long moment, amber eyes never leaving her face. You're either very brave or very foolish. My children would say foolish, Elena murmured, then froze as she realized her slip. Your children? Lucian's voice sharpened instantly. You mentioned you were unmated. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. I care for orphans in my pack. I misspoke. The lie tasted bitter, but what choice did she have? If he knew the truth, that she was the desperate human mother who'd started this charade, that everything about her identity was false, would he honor their bargain? Would her children remain fed and safe? Lucian studied her for several heartbeats that felt like hours. Finally he nodded, but Elena caught the skepticism flickering in his gaze. He suspected something, even if he couldn't identify what. It's late, he said, rising fluidly. You should rest. Tomorrow we'll discuss your role here in more detail. Elena stood as well, relief and disappointment warring in her chest. Of course, you're Lucian. As she moved toward the door, his voice stopped her. Arya, lies have a way of revealing themselves eventually. When they do, the truth is often far less damaging than the deception itself. Elena's hand froze on the door handle. Without turning around, she whispered, some truths carry prices too high to pay. Perhaps. Or perhaps we simply convince ourselves they do. The morning light filtered through the ornate windows of Sarah's chambers, casting golden patterns across the silk sheets where she lay restless and conflicted. 3 days had passed since Kieran's declaration in the dungeons, 3 days of careful meals and soft beds that felt more like chains than comfort. Her children were safe, fed, and cared for in rooms adjacent to hers, but the weight of her deception pressed against her chest like a stone. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. Enter, she called, expecting one of the servants who had been attending to her needs with nervous efficiency. Instead, Kieran stepped through the doorway, and Sarah's breath caught. Gone was the formal regalia of the Alpha King. He wore simple dark clothing that somehow made him appear more dangerous, more intimate. His silver eyes swept over her, taking in her loose hair and the way she clutched the bedsheets to her chest. You've been avoiding me, he said, closing the door behind him with deliberate slowness. I've been resting as you commanded. The words came out sharper than she intended, but she couldn't help herself. The closer he came, the more her carefully constructed walls threatened to crumble. Commanded. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Is that what you think this is? Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze. What else would you call holding someone against their will? Protection. He moved closer, and she caught his scent. Pine and winter storms, utterly masculine and unsettling in its appeal. Your village believes you're dead, Sarah. The council members who discovered your children think them orphans taken in by royal charity. You're safe here. Safe, she repeated bitterly. A beautiful cage is still a cage. Something flickered across his features. Hurt, perhaps, though it vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. You think so little of my intentions. I don't know what your intentions are. She stood, wrapping a silk robe around herself, needing the barrier however flimsy. You spare my children. You give us luxury beyond imagining, but you won't let us leave. What am I supposed to think? Kieran was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin flush. Has anyone here harmed you? Threatened you? No, but have your children been given everything they need? Education, proper food, medical care? Yes, but that's not the point. Then what is the point, Sarah? His voice dropped lower, rougher. What exactly are you so afraid of? The question hung between them like a blade. Because she was afraid, she realized. Not of him hurting her. Despite his fearsome reputation, Kieran had shown her nothing but care. No, what terrified her was the way her heart raced when he looked at her like this, the way her body responded to his presence, despite every rational thought screaming warnings. I'm afraid, she whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep inside, of forgetting who I really am. Understanding dawned in his silver eyes. You think this softness will make you weak. I think comfort makes people complacent. I think luxury makes them forget the price that was paid for it. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. My children were starving, Kieran. I did what I had to do to save them, but I can't let myself forget where we came from. And you believe staying here means forgetting? I believe staying here means owing you a debt I can never repay. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze squarely. And I've learned that debts to powerful men always come with interest. For a moment, something dangerous flashed in Kieran's eyes, and Sarah tensed. But then his expression softened, becoming almost vulnerable. What if there was no debt? He asked quietly. What if I wanted you to stay not because you owe me, but because He stopped himself, jaw clenching. Because you what? But Kieran had already retreated behind his walls again, the moment of openness vanishing like morning mist. Because the kingdom needs people like you, people who understand what it means to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. It wasn't what he had been about to say, and they both knew it. The air between them thrummed with unspoken words, with possibilities that neither seemed brave enough to voice. The children are asking for you, he said finally, stepping back toward the door. They miss their mother's attention. They're not prisoners in their rooms, no more than you are in yours. His hand paused on the door handle. The choice to stay or go was always yours, Sarah, but perhaps you might consider that some cages are opened from the inside. He left her then, alone with the morning light and the growing certainty that her heart was already making choices her mind wasn't ready to acknowledge. The morning light filtered through the ornate windows of Lyra's chambers, casting golden patterns across the silk sheets where she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. 3 days had passed since Kyle's revelation about the bond, and she felt as though she were walking through a dream, or perhaps a carefully constructed trap. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called, expecting one of the servants. Instead, Kyle entered, carrying a silver tray laden with breakfast. The sight of the Alpha King performing such a mundane task sent a shock of surprise through her. "You don't need to." "I wanted to," he said simply, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "We need to talk." Lyra pulled a robe around herself and joined him at the table, acutely aware of how domestic this felt, how dangerous that domesticity was to her carefully guarded heart. "I've arranged for you to see your children today," Kyle announced, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups. "They're being cared for in the East Wing, but I thought you might want to spend time with them properly." Relief flooded through her so intensely that tears sprang to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about them." Something flickered across his features. Hurt, perhaps. "I would never use children as leverage, Lyra. Whatever else you believe about me, know that." She studied his face, searching for deception and finding none. It was becoming increasingly difficult to reconcile the man before her with the ruthless reputation that preceded him. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. "You could force this bond, demand my submission. Instead, you bring me breakfast and arrange visits with my children." Kyle was quiet for a long moment, his fingers wrapped around his teacup. "Because I've spent my entire life taking what I wanted through force and fear. It's made me powerful, but it's also made me—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Alone, completely alone." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. This was not the Alpha King speaking, but simply a man, one who seemed as trapped by his circumstances as she was by hers. "The bond," she began carefully. "What exactly does it mean?" "I know the stories, but—" "It means our souls recognize each other as perfect matches," he explained, his golden eyes meeting hers. "It's rare. Some wolves live their entire lives without finding their true mate. The bond can't be forced or faked, it simply exists." "But I'm not even a wolf," Lyra protested. "How is this possible?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I felt it the moment you walked into my throne room. Even through your disguise, even when I thought you were someone else entirely." His hand moved across the table, stopping just short of touching hers. "Tell me you don't feel it too." Lyra's breath caught. She did feel it, that strange pull toward him, the way her heart raced when he was near, the inexplicable sense of rightness when they were together. She'd attributed it to fear, to the stress of her situation, but deep down she knew it was something more. "I feel it," she whispered. "But feeling something doesn't make it right. I barely know you." "Then let me show you who I am," Kyle said, his voice urgent. "Not the Alpha King, not the ruler everyone fears, just me." Before she could respond, another knock sounded at the door. This time it was Marcus, though he waited for permission before entering. "Your Majesty," he said with a bow, "there's been a development. The delegation from the Shadowmoon Pack has arrived early. They're demanding an immediate audience." Kyle's expression hardened instantly, the vulnerable man disappearing behind the mask of authority. "Did they say what this concerns?" "The bride price negotiations, Your Majesty. Apparently there are concerns about the delay in finalizing your mating ceremony." Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. "Bride price negotiations?" Kyle shot Marcus a sharp look before turning to her. "It's nothing you need to worry about. It's about another mate, isn't it?" she interrupted, pieces clicking into place. "You were already promised to someone else." The silence that followed was answer enough. "Lady Isadora of the Shadowmoon Pack," Kyle said finally. "The arrangement was made years ago for political alliance." Lyra stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "So what am I then? A mistress? A temporary distraction until you fulfill your obligations?" "No," Kyle said fiercely, rising to face her. "You're my true mate. That supersedes any political arrangement." "Try explaining that to a pack who's expecting their daughter to become queen," Lyra shot back. "This is exactly what I was afraid of, being caught in the middle of conflicts I never asked for." Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Your Majesty, they're waiting in the throne room." Kyle's jaw clenched. "Tell them I'll be there shortly." As Marcus departed, he turned back to Lyra. "This changes nothing between us." But as Lyra watched him transform back into the Alpha King, she wondered if anything between them had ever been real at all. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Kyle's private chambers, casting golden streaks across the stone floor where Lyra sat cross-legged, carefully mending one of her children's torn tunics. The domestic scene should have brought peace, but tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Kyle stood at the window, his broad shoulders rigid as he stared out at the training grounds below. He hadn't spoken since their argument the night before, when she'd again pleaded to visit her children. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and wounded pride. "They're asking questions," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "The council members. They want to know why I'm keeping a human woman in my private quarters." Lyra's needles stilled. She'd known this moment would come. "What did you tell them?" "That it's none of their concern." His reflection in the glass showed hardened features, but she caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "But they're not satisfied with that answer." Setting down her mending, Lyra rose and moved toward him. "Perhaps because you're not satisfied with it either." Kyle turned, his amber eyes blazing. "Don't presume to know what I think." "Then tell me." She stepped closer, close enough to smell his intoxicating scent of cedar and wild rain. "What am I to you, Kale? Really?" The question hung between them like a blade. For a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath. Then his jaw hardened again. "You're under my protection. That should be enough." "For who? Them or me?" Lyra's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "I'm not some prize to be kept in a tower. I have a life, responsibilities. Your children are fed and housed better than most nobles." Kyle snarled, moving closer until she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "They want for nothing, except their mother." The words hit their mark. Something flickered across his features, pain perhaps, or recognition. His hand rose as if to touch her face, then dropped to his side. "You think I don't know what it costs you to stay here?" His voice was rough, barely controlled. "You think I don't see how you stare out that window every dawn, wondering if your children are crying for you?" Lyra's breath caught. She hadn't realized he'd been watching, hadn't known he'd noticed her silent vigils. Then why? The question came out as a whisper. "Why keep me here if you know I'm suffering?" Kyle's control finally snapped. In one swift movement, he backed her against the stone wall, his hands braced on either side of her head. The heat of his body pressed close, overwhelming her senses. "Because I'm selfish," he growled, his mouth inches from hers. "Because for the first time in 20 years, I wake up and there's something worth protecting in my bed besides an empty crown." His confession hit her like a physical blow. The Alpha King, the most powerful man in the realm, was afraid, not of war or enemies or political machinations, but of being alone again. "Kyle," she breathed, her hand rising to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. "I know what I am," he continued, his voice breaking. "I'm a monster who's taken you from everything you love because I can't bear to let you go. I know it's wrong, but I—" She silenced him with her lips, pouring everything she couldn't say into the kiss. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "You're not a monster," she whispered against his mouth. "Broken, perhaps. Afraid, but not a monster." His laugh was bitter. "Tell that to the families of my enemies." "I'm not talking about the Alpha King. I'm talking about you. The man who personally ensures my children have the best tutors, who leaves books on my nightstand because you noticed I love poetry, who holds me when nightmares wake me and never asks for more than I can give." Kyle's forehead dropped against hers, his eyes closing as if her words caused physical pain. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, "how to care for someone without caging them." Lyra's heart clenched. Here was the truth of it. Not cruelty, but ignorance. A man raised to rule through dominance, struggling to love without conquest. "Then learn," she said simply. "Trust me enough to let me choose you freely." He pulled back to search her face. "And if you choose to leave?" The question cost him everything to ask. Lyra saw the boy he'd once been before power and responsibility had hardened him into something unbreakable. "Then you'll know I stayed because I wanted to, not because I had no choice." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the weight of possibility hanging between them like dawn breaking over a battlefield. Finally, Kael stepped back. "The children can visit this afternoon," he said quietly, "and you may see them whenever you wish." It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kael's private study, casting golden streaks across the mahogany desk where Elena sat reviewing grain distribution reports. 3 weeks had passed since the revelation of her true nature, and the castle had settled into an unexpected rhythm. She found herself genuinely useful here, her experience managing resources during lean times proving invaluable to the kingdom's relief efforts. "The southern provinces report their first successful harvest in 2 seasons, she said as Kael entered, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea. The simple domestic gesture still surprised her. This fearsome alpha king who served her morning tea as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Your irrigation suggestions worked." He set her cup down, his fingers brushing hers briefly. That familiar spark of electricity shot through her, stronger now that she wasn't constantly fighting to suppress her true scent. "The engineers say the new channel system increased their yield by 30%. Elena felt a flush of pride, quickly followed by guilt. She was helping his kingdom thrive while her own children remained in that cramped cottage, dependent on the supplies she sent but missing their mother. "I should visit Mira and Thomas soon. It's been too long since I've seen them." Kael's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a tightness around his eyes that she'd learned to recognize. "Of course. Though perhaps they might be more comfortable here, in the castle." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "They're safe where they are, happy. Moving them here would only confuse them." He nodded, but she caught the flash of hurt that crossed his features before he masked it. These past weeks had shown her sides of him she'd never imagined. Not just the tender lover, but the man who worried about his people's welfare, who remembered the names of servants' children, who sometimes stood at his window late at night with the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Marcus entered, his usual easy demeanor replaced by grim urgency. "Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty, but we have a situation. Lord Aldrich has arrived unexpectedly with a delegation from the Northern Territories." Elena felt the temperature in the room seem to drop. She'd heard whispers about Lord Aldrich, Kael's cousin and rival, who'd contested his right to rule and commanded significant support among the noble houses. "He's requesting an immediate audience," Marcus continued. "Says it's a matter of kingdom security." Kael's jaw tightened. "How many in his party?" 20, including 6 alphas from prominent families. They're armed but within protocol limits." Elena rose from her chair, instinctively moving toward the door. "I should leave you to handle this privately." "Stay." Kael's command was gentle but firm. "Aldrich will have heard about you by now. Better he meet you on our terms." Her stomach knotted. She'd known this moment would come eventually, when her presence here would become a political issue rather than a personal one. What exactly will he have heard? "That the Alpha King has taken a human as his consort," Marcus said grimly. "The rumors have been creative in their speculation about your influence over His Majesty's decisions. They think I'm manipulating you." Elena's voice was flat. "That the recent policy changes, the focus on human settlements, are the result of unnatural influence, yes." Kael moved to her side, his hand finding the small of her back. "Aldrich will use any perceived weakness to challenge my authority." "But you are not a weakness, Elena. You're the strongest person I know." The conviction in his voice made her chest tight. How had this happened? How had she gone from desperately seeking his help to becoming someone he defended, someone whose opinion mattered in the governance of his kingdom? "Your Majesty," Marcus pressed gently. "They're waiting in the great hall." Elena took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Then we shouldn't keep them waiting." Kael's eyes searched her face. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." And she realized she meant it. Not just because hiding would make them both look weak, but because somewhere along the way she'd begun to care about this kingdom and its people. Her people now, in a way she hadn't expected. Besides, I'm curious to meet the man who thinks he'd make a better king than you." A slow smile spread across Kyle's features, predatory and proud. "That's my fierce consort." The word sent warmth spiraling through her, followed immediately by panic. When had she started thinking of herself that way? When had this arrangement begun to feel less like captivity and more like home? They walked toward the great hall together, Elena's hand tucked into the crook of Kyle's elbow, both of them understanding that whatever happened in the next hour would change everything. The game of politics she'd tried so hard to avoid was about to begin in earnest, and this time she wouldn't just be fighting for her children's survival. She'd be fighting for the life she was terrified to admit she wanted. The morning sun filtered through the ornate windows of Lyra's chambers, casting golden patterns across the marble floor. She sat at the vanity, her fingers trembling as she attempted to braid her hair. 3 days had passed since Kyle's declaration in the garden, and the weight of his words still pressed against her chest like a physical force. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting one of the servants. Instead, Kyle entered, his presence immediately filling the room with that familiar electric tension. He wore simple training clothes rather than his usual formal attire, and somehow this made him seem more dangerous, more real. "We're going somewhere today," he announced, his amber eyes studying her reflection in the mirror. "Where?" She turned to face him, noting the way his gaze lingered on her loose hair before meeting her eyes. "To see your children." Lyra's heart stopped. "What?" "You heard me." He moved closer, his expression unreadable. "I've arranged for them to visit. They should arrive within the hour." She shot to her feet, panic and joy warring in her chest. "Kyle, why would you—" "Because you need to see them," he said simply, "and they need to see that you're safe." Tears pricked at her eyes. In all her calculations and fears about staying at his side, she hadn't dared hope for this. "Thank you," she whispered. Something flickered across his features, surprise perhaps at her genuine gratitude. "There are conditions." Of course there were. What conditions? "They cannot know the truth about our arrangement. As far as they're concerned, you're here as my honored guest." His voice hardened slightly. "And Lyra, they will not be leaving with you today." The reminder hit her like a physical blow, but she nodded. She would take whatever time she could get. An hour later, she stood in the palace's sun-drenched courtyard, her heart hammering as a simple carriage approached. When the door opened and 2 small figures tumbled out, Lyra nearly collapsed with relief. "Mama!" Elena's voice rang across the courtyard as she raced forward, her dark curls bouncing. Behind her, Thomas followed with more restraint but equal eagerness, his 7-year-old dignity intact until he reached her arms. Lyra sank to her knees, gathering both children against her chest, breathing in their familiar scent of sunshine and innocence. They were clean, well-dressed, and most importantly, healthy. Whatever arrangements Kyle had made for their care, they had been thorough. "We missed you so much," Elena said, her small hands patting Lyra's cheeks. "The nice lady said you were helping the king." "Are you really?" Over their heads, Lyra met Kyle's eyes. He stood several paces away, watching the reunion with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm helping him with something very important." "Is he mean?" Thomas asked in a whisper that carried clearly across the courtyard. "Marcus says all alphas are mean." Before Lyra could respond, Kyle stepped forward. The children instinctively moved closer to their mother, but he crouched down to their level, making himself less imposing. "What do you think?" he asked Thomas directly. "Do I seem mean to you?" Thomas studied him with the serious consideration only a child could muster. "You're very big," he said finally, "and your eyes are scary. But you made sure we had food, and the lady taking care of us said you told her to give us anything we wanted. And you smell like Mama now," Elena added matter-of-factly, causing heat to flood Lyra's cheeks. Kyle's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that so?" "Uh-huh. She smells different than before, like flowers and something else." Elena wrinkled her nose in concentration. Something strong. Lyra wanted to disappear. Children and their brutally honest observations. Elena, it's not bad, the little girl continued cheerfully. It's like when Mrs. Henderson's daughter came back from her mating ceremony. She smelled like her new husband, too. The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra felt Kyle eyes on her, burning with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Even Thomas was looking between them now, with dawning understanding far too advanced for his age. Children, Kyle said carefully, why don't you show your mother the new clothes the seamstress made for you? I believe there's also a picnic prepared in the gardens. As the children excitedly pulled her toward the gardens, chattering about their new life and asking a dozen questions about the palace, Lyra tried to ignore the weight of Kyle's stare following them. Elena's innocent observation had revealed something she'd been trying to deny even to herself. The bond between them was growing stronger, strong enough that even children could scent it on her. And from the predatory satisfaction she glimpsed in Kyle's expression when she glanced back, he knew it too. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds as Lyra watched Kyle spar with his guards. Each movement was fluid, predatory grace incarnate, and she found herself mesmerized despite the turmoil churning in her chest. 3 weeks had passed since their heated confrontation in his chambers, and the tension between them had only grown thicker, more suffocating. She clutched the letter that had arrived at dawn, its contents burning against her palm like a brand. News from the human settlements, whispers of her children asking when Mama would come home, of Elena growing thinner despite the food supplies Kyle had promised. The Alpha King had kept his word about provisions, but her heart ached with every day of separation. You're distracted. Lyra spun to find Marcus approaching, his weathered face creased with concern. The Beta had become an unexpected ally these past weeks, offering guidance when the pack dynamics threatened to overwhelm her. I received word from home, she admitted, not bothering to hide the pain in her voice. My children. Marcus nodded knowingly. The bond between parent and child transcends all species. Kyle understands this more than you might think. Before Lyra could ask what he meant, a commotion erupted near the castle gates. Shouts echoed across the courtyard as guards rushed toward the entrance. Kyle abandoned his sparring partner mid-strike, his alpha instincts immediately alert. Lyra's blood turned to ice as she recognized the scent carried on the wind, human, familiar, and tinged with desperation. Her heart hammered against her ribs as 3 figures were escorted into the courtyard, their clothes torn and muddy from hard travel. "Mama!" Elena's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Lyra's youngest daughter broke free from the guards and raced across the stones, her thin frame trembling with exhaustion and relief. Behind her, Thomas and little Mari followed, their faces gaunt but determined. Lyra dropped to her knees as Elena crashed into her arms, the letter forgotten as it fluttered away on the morning breeze. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" "The traders told us where you'd gone," Thomas panted, his 12-year-old face far too serious. "We waited and waited, but you never came back. The village elders said you probably died, but I knew better. I knew you were alive." "We walked for days," Mari whispered against Lyra's shoulder, her small fingers clutching desperately at her mother's dress. "Thomas said we had to find you before the snows came." The weight of their journey, their fear, their unwavering faith in her, crashed over Lyra like an avalanche. She held them close, breathing in their familiar scents, feeling whole for the first time in weeks. A shadow fell across them. Lyra looked up to find Kyle towering over their reunion, his expression unreadable. The children pressed closer to her, instinctively sensing the predator in their midst. "So," his voice was dangerously soft, "these are the cubs you abandoned your pack to save." "They're my children," Lyra said fiercely, rising to her feet while keeping her arms protectively around Elena and Mari. "And they're under your protection now, whether you like it or not." Something flickered in Kyle's golden eyes, surprise perhaps at her boldness. He studied the 3 young faces peering out from behind their mother's skirts, taking in their obvious exhaustion and malnutrition. "Guards!" he commanded, and Lyra tensed. Escort these children to the kitchens. See that they're fed and given proper quarters in the family wing." Relief flooded through her so suddenly she swayed on her feet. "Thank you," she whispered. But Kyle wasn't finished. He stepped closer, close enough that only she could hear his next words. "This changes nothing between us, Lyra. You gave your oath to remain at my side. Your children are welcome here, but you belong to this pack now. To me." The possessive growl in his voice sent shivers down her spine, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "And what makes you think I'll simply accept captivity because you've shown my children kindness?" His smile was sharp, predatory. "Because now you have something precious here to protect. You won't risk their safety by running, and you won't deny them the security this pack provides." He leaned even closer, his breath hot against her ear. "You're exactly where you belong, little mate. It just took your cubs arriving to make you see it." As he walked away, Lyra felt the trap closing around her with crystalline clarity. He was right, damn him. With her children here, she was truly bound to this place, to him. But as she watched Elena laugh for the first time in months at something one of the Omega's servants said, she realized that perhaps being trapped wasn't the worst fate imaginable. Perhaps it was exactly what she'd been searching for all along, a home where her family could finally be safe. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kyle's private study, casting long shadows across the maps spread over his desk. Elena stood beside him, her fingers tracing the borders of the eastern territories, where reports of unrest had been growing. 3 weeks had passed since she'd agreed to stay, and their partnership had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a balance of her compassion and his strength that was transforming the kingdom. "The grain distribution centers here and here," she pointed to 2 villages. "They're not reaching the families who need it most. The local officials are hoarding supplies." Kyle's jaw tightened. "I'll send investigators immediately." "Let me go instead," Elena said, meeting his gaze. "They'll trust me more than your soldiers. I know what it's like to watch your children go hungry." The pain in her voice still cut through him, even after all this time. He'd made sure her own children wanted for nothing now, but he understood that the memory of their suffering would always drive her to help others. "It's dangerous," he said, though he already knew he would agree. Her insights had proven invaluable, and more than that, he was learning to trust her judgment. "Take a full guard detail." She smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. "Thank you." Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same document, and the familiar spark of electricity passed between them. These moments had been happening more frequently. Stolen glances across council meetings, conversations that stretched late into the night, the growing awareness that what had begun as necessity was becoming something deeper. A sharp knock interrupted them. Marcus entered without waiting for permission, his expression grim. "Your Majesty, we have a problem. Lady Vivian has arrived with a formal delegation from the northern houses." Elena felt her blood turn to ice. Vivian, Kyle's intended bride, the Omega whose betrothal contract had been arranged years ago. She'd heard whispers about the beautiful noblewoman, but had hoped the matter would remain buried in political maneuvering. Kyle's face became an unreadable mask. "I didn't authorize any visit. She claims to be invoking her right as your betrothed to demand an explanation for the delays in your union ceremony," Marcus continued. "The Northern Lords are with her, and they're displeased about certain rumors regarding a human woman in the palace." Elena stepped back instinctively, feeling suddenly exposed. Of course, word had spread about her presence here. She'd been naive to think they could exist in their growing bubble of partnership and tentative affection without consequences. "Elena," Kyle began, but she was already moving toward the door. "I should go. This is between you and your intended bride." His hand caught her wrist, stopping her. "Don't. Please." The desperation in his voice made her heart clench, but she pulled free anyway. "This is what you were always meant to do, Kyle. Marry her, secure your alliances, rule your kingdom. I was just a temporary arrangement. You know that's not true anymore." She did know it, could see it in his eyes every time he looked at her. felt it in the way he sought her opinion on matters of state, in how he'd begun including her in decisions that shaped the kingdom. But wanting something and being able to have it were two different things. "I'm human," she whispered. "I can't give you what she can. The political connections, the pure bloodline, the children who will inherit your throne without question. We both knew this day would come." Before he could respond, she slipped out of the study, her heart breaking with each step. In the hallway, she nearly collided with a vision of ethereal beauty, Lady Vivian herself, flanked by stern-faced northern nobles. The Omega was everything Elena was not, tall, elegant, with silver-blonde hair and ice-blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "You must be the human," Vivian said, her voice melodious but cold. "How quaint." Elena lifted her chin, drawing on reserves of strength she'd thought depleted. "Lady Vivian, welcome to the palace." "Thank you, though I suspect my welcome will be warmer once certain irregularities are addressed." Vivian's gaze swept over Elena dismissively. "I trust you understand that your services, whatever they may have been, are no longer required." The words stung, but Elena forced herself to remain composed. "I serve at His Majesty's pleasure." "Indeed. And His Majesty's pleasures are about to change significantly." As Vivian swept past her toward the study, Elena pressed herself against the wall, feeling smaller than she had since those desperate early days. Through the partially open door, she heard Vivian's lilting voice greeting Kael, heard the murmur of the Northern Lords discussing treaties and alliances. This was Kael's world. Politics and bloodlines, ancient contracts and carefully orchestrated unions. She'd been foolish to think her growing feelings for him could overcome centuries of tradition. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the memory of his desperate plea for her to stay, or the look in his eyes that suggested he might be willing to fight for what they'd built together. The question was whether love could triumph over duty, or if she was about to lose the man who had become her heart. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Kieran's private study, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where Elena sat reviewing grain distribution reports. 3 weeks had passed since their return from the borderlands, and the rhythm of their shared duties had become as natural as breathing. She looked up as the door opened, expecting to see Kieran, but instead found Marcus entering with an expression that made her stomach clench. "Your Majesty," he said, his usual easy demeanor replaced by something grave. "We've received word from the Council of Neighboring Territories. They're demanding an audience." Elena set down her quill, the familiar weight of dread settling in her chest. "What do they want?" "To discuss the legitimacy of your union with the Alpha King." Marcus's jaw tightened. "They claim to have evidence that your bond was formed under false pretenses." Before Elena could respond, Kieran's presence filled the doorway. His golden eyes swept between them, immediately assessing the tension in the room. "What evidence?" Marcus handed him a sealed letter bearing multiple territorial crests. "They know about Elena's true identity when she first arrived. Someone has been feeding them information." Kieran tore open the letter, his expression growing darker with each line he read. Elena watched the muscle in his jaw tick, a sign she'd learned meant he was fighting to control his temper. "They're threatening to declare our bond invalid unless Elena submits to their judgment," he said finally, the words carrying the weight of barely contained fury. "They want to examine her, determine if she's worthy of her position." "Examine me?" Elena stood, her own anger rising. "Like some prize animal?" "It's a power play," Marcus said. "They've been looking for a way to challenge Kieran's authority since he unified the territories. An allegedly illegitimate Luna gives them the opening they need." Elena felt the familiar chill of fear, but this time it was different. Not the desperate terror of a mother facing starvation for her children, but the cold fury of a woman who had found her place in the world only to have others try to tear it away. "When do they expect a response?" she asked. 3 days, Kieran replied, crumpling the letter in his fist. "But they won't get the one they're hoping for." "What do you mean?" His eyes met hers, blazing with protective intensity. I mean, we're not playing their games. The bond between us is real, Elena. It doesn't matter how it began. Elena moved closer to him, placing her hand on his arm. She could feel the tension thrumming through him, the barely leashed power of an alpha prepared to go to war for his mate. But if we refuse, they could use it to justify rebellion. How many innocents would suffer in that conflict? You're not seriously considering submitting to their judgment, Marcus said, looking between them with alarm. I'm considering all our options, Elena replied. My children are safe now, but what about all the others throughout the territories? If our bond is questioned, it undermines everything we've worked to build. Kieran's hand covered hers, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin despite the storm raging in his eyes. Elena, you don't understand what they're asking. Their examination isn't just about bloodlines or worthiness. They want to humiliate you, to break the bond between us through pain and degradation. The words hit her like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain steady. And if I refuse, then we fight, he said simply. I've done it before. But this time you wouldn't be fighting alone, she said softly. You'd be fighting for something more than just territory or power. You'd be fighting for us, for our children, for the future we're building together. Something shifted in Kieran's expression, a vulnerability breaking through his alpha composure. Elena, I can't lose you. Not now, not after everything. She cupped his face in her hands, feeling the slight tremor that ran through him. You won't lose me, but we need to be smart about this. If we can prove our bond is genuine, unshakable, then their challenge loses all power. How do you propose we do that? Marcus asked. Elena looked between the two men who had become her anchors in this world of political complexity and supernatural power. An idea was forming, dangerous but potentially brilliant. The lunar convergence, she said. It's in 2 weeks. If we can demonstrate our bond during the ceremony in front of witnesses from all territories, they can't question its legitimacy. Kieran's eyes widened slightly. Elena, the convergence ceremony is intense. The bond becomes visible, tangible. Everyone would see exactly what we mean to each other. Then they'd see the truth, she said firmly, that this started as deception but became something real, something worth fighting for. Marcus nodded slowly. It could work, but it's a significant risk. If the bond appears weak or forced, it won't, Elena said with quiet certainty, her eyes never leaving Kieran's face. Because it isn't. The morning light filtered through the ornate windows of Kyle's private chambers as Elena stood before the mirror, her reflection showing a woman transformed. The simple clothes she'd worn as a desperate mother seeking help had been replaced by elegant gowns befitting her position at the Alpha King's side, yet she felt more herself than she had in years. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting one of the servants. Instead, Marcus entered, his expression grave. "Your Majesty," he said, addressing her with a title that still felt foreign on her ears. "There's been a development." Elena's heart clenched. "My children?" "They're safe," Marcus assured her quickly. "But Lord Garrett has mobilized his supporters. He's challenging the King's decision to elevate your status. He's calling for a formal pack assembly." The color drained from Elena's face. She'd known this moment would come. The reckoning where Kyle's choice to bind himself to a human would face scrutiny from the most powerful wolves in the kingdom. When? Tonight. The Alpha King requests your presence in his study immediately. Elena found Kyle pacing behind his massive desk, tension radiating from every line of his powerful frame. When he saw her, his amber eyes softened slightly, but the worry remained. "You've heard," he said without preamble. "Marcus told me." She moved closer, noting the documents scattered across his desk, maps, letters, what appeared to be military reports. "How bad is it?" Kyle's jaw tightened. "Garrett has convinced 3 of the 5 major pack leaders to support him. They're questioning my judgment, claiming a human Luna will weaken the kingdom." His voice dropped to a dangerous growl. Some are suggesting I've been compromised by magic or manipulation. Elena felt the familiar stab of inadequacy that had plagued her since arriving at the palace. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am a weakness you can't afford. In 2 swift strides, Kyle was before her, his hands cupping her face with surprising gentleness. "Don't," he said fiercely. "Don't let their fear diminish what you are, what we are. But if it threatens your rule, then I'll remind them why I'm their king." The intensity in his voice sent shivers through her. "Elena, you've brought something to this kingdom that brute strength never could. The children's villages you've helped establish, the alliances you've forged with the human settlements, you've created peace where there was only suspicion." She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his unwavering conviction. "What do we do?" "We face them together." Kyle's thumb traced her cheekbone. "There's an old law, rarely invoked, that allows for a challenge to be settled through trial by choice. The assembly can present their concerns, but ultimately the decision remains with the reigning alpha and his chosen mate. And if they refuse to accept that?" Kyle's smile was sharp, predatory. "Then they'll remember exactly how I claimed this throne in the first place." As evening approached, Elena found herself in the great assembly hall, its vaulted ceiling seeming to press down upon her. The most powerful wolves in the kingdom had gathered, their eyes following her every movement. She could smell their skepticism, their barely contained hostility. Lord Garrett stood at the center of the opposition, his silver hair gleaming in the torchlight. "My king," he began, his tone respectful but challenging, "we gather not out of disrespect but out of concern for the kingdom's future. A human Luna, no matter her personal qualities, cannot provide the strength our people need." Murmurs of agreement rippled through his supporters. Elena felt her resolve waver until she felt Kyle's presence beside her, solid and unshakable. "Lord Garrett." Kyle's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. "You speak of strength as though it can only be measured in fang and claw. Tell me, in your centuries of life, have you ever seen our kingdom more stable, more prosperous?" "Prosperity built on a foundation of sand," Garrett countered. "What happens when other kingdoms see our weakness, when they test our borders? Then they'll discover that a king who fights for love is far more dangerous than one who fights for duty alone." Kyle's arm encircled Elena's waist, pulling her closer. "This woman risked everything to save her children. She's faced down enemies, both human and wolf, to protect the innocent. If that's weakness, then perhaps you don't understand what true strength looks like." Elena stepped forward, her voice ringing clear despite the tremor in her hands. "I never asked to be your Luna," she said, addressing the assembly directly. "I came here desperate and terrified, willing to sacrifice everything for my children. But I've learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from admitting you can't face everything alone." She turned to Kyle, seeing the fierce pride burning in his eyes. "Your king chose me not despite my humanity, but because of it. Because he understood that ruling isn't just about commanding fear, it's about inspiring hope." The hall fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the gathered wolves like a challenge of its own. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kieran's private chambers, casting golden streaks across the marble floor where Ilara stood frozen. In his hands, he held the crumpled letter that had arrived with the dawn, a message that would shatter the fragile peace they had built. "They're coming," Kieran said, his voice hollow as his eyes scanned the parchment again. "The Council of Alphas. They've called for an emergency tribunal." Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. "What does that mean?" "It means someone told them about us, about what you are." He crushed the letter in his fist, the paper dissolving to ash between his fingers. A display of power that would have terrified her weeks ago. Now it only made her want to comfort him. "They're demanding your immediate execution for the crime of deception." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had known this moment might come, had felt it lurking in every shadow since the night Kieran discovered her true nature, yet hearing it spoken aloud made her legs weak. "How long do we have?" 3 days. They'll be here by sunset on the third day. Kieran moved to the window, his broad shoulders tense as he stared out at the sprawling kingdom below. The letter bears the seals of all 5 neighboring territories. They mean to make an example of you, Ilara, to show what happens when humans dare to deceive their betters. Ilara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm morning light. Then I should go. If I leave now... No. The word cracked like a whip. Kieran spun to face her, his silver eyes blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. You're not running. Not anymore. Kieran, be reasonable. If they find me here, let them find you. He crossed the room in 3 swift strides, capturing her face in his hands. His touch was gentle despite the fury radiating from him. Do you think I would let them take you? Do you think I've spent these weeks learning to love you just to hand you over to those pompous fools? Love. The word hung between them like a bridge neither had dared to cross until now. Ilara's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. You can't fight the entire council, not for me. I won't let you destroy everything you've built because of my lies. Your lies? Kieran laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You lied to save your children, to survive. They've lied for centuries to maintain power they never deserved. His thumbs traced the curve of her cheekbones. Besides, you forget who I am, little one. I am the Alpha King. I bow to no council. Despite everything, Ilara felt a smile tug at her lips. Your arrogance never fails to astound me. It's not arrogance if it's true. But his expression softened, vulnerability creeping into those silver depths. I can't lose you, Ilara. Not now. Not when I've finally found something worth fighting for. She leaned into his touch, memorizing the warmth of his palms against her skin. What are you planning? The tribunal follows ancient law. They cannot simply execute you without cause. They need to prove deliberate malice, intent to harm the pack structure. Kieran's eyes sharpened, and Ilara could practically see his strategic mind working. But there's another law, older than their tribunal, the right of sanctuary. I don't understand. If an alpha claims a mate, truly claims them, bonds them with the ancient rights, no outside authority can challenge that bond. You would be under my protection, absolutely. His hands trembled slightly against her face. But Ilara, it would mean I could never leave. She finished the thought, understanding flooding through her. The bond would tie me to you forever. Literally. Kieran nodded, his jaw tight. I won't make that choice for you. Despite everything, you came here seeking freedom for your children. I won't be another cage, even a gilded one. Ilara studied his face, seeing the war raging behind his careful control. He would let her go. Even now, with death approaching and his own heart on the line, he would give her the choice he'd never offered before. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man she'd once thought a monster was prepared to sacrifice everything for her freedom, while those who claimed to uphold justice sought only her destruction. If I agreed to this bonding, she said carefully, what would happen to my children? They would be mine as well, protected, provided for, loved. His voice dropped to a whisper. We would be a family, Ilara, in every way that matters. The future stretched before her. Uncertain, dangerous, but filled with a love she'd never dared hope for. Outside these walls, the council gathered their forces, but here, in this moment, there was only choice. Ask me, she whispered. What? Ask me properly, you impossible alpha. Her smile was soft, radiant. Ask me to stay. The morning sun cast long shadows across the castle courtyard, as Lyra stood before the assembled crowd, her heart thundering beneath the simple white gown that had been prepared for her. The fabric felt foreign against her skin, too fine, too clean for someone who had spent years scraping by in the slums. Yet, as Kyle's eyes met hers across the space between them, she felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the sunlight streaming down. The ceremony had been planned quickly, almost hastily by royal standards, but Kyle had insisted. I've waited long enough to claim what's mine, he had growled the night before, his possessive words sending shivers down her spine that she was no longer afraid to acknowledge as desire. Elena and Thomas stood in the front row, their faces bright with wonder at the spectacle unfolding before them. Elena wore a new dress of pale blue silk, while Thomas fidgeted in his formal clothes, occasionally reaching up to touch the small crown of flowers that had been placed on his head as the Alpha King's soon-to-be stepson. The sight of them, healthy, happy, safe, made tears prick at Lyra's eyes. The High Priestess began the ancient words, her voice carrying across the courtyard with practiced authority. Around them, nobles and servants alike watched in fascination as their feared Alpha King prepared to bind himself to a woman who had dared to deceive him. Many still whispered about the scandal of it all, but Lyra found she no longer cared about their opinions. When the priestess called for the exchange of vows, Kyle stepped forward, his massive frame somehow managing to move with surprising grace. His dark hair had been pulled back, revealing the strong lines of his face and those piercing amber eyes that had once terrified her. Now they held only warmth and an intensity that made her breath catch. "Lara," he began, his deep voice carrying easily to every corner of the courtyard, "you came to me in desperation, willing to sacrifice everything for your children. You showed me a courage I had forgotten existed, a love so fierce it humbled me. You challenged me, defied me, and somehow managed to slip past every wall I had built around my heart." His hand reached out to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You are my mate, my equal, my queen. I vow to protect you and your children with my life, to stand beside you in all things, and to love you until my last breath." The crowd murmured appreciatively, but Lyra barely heard them. Her world had narrowed to just Kyle, to the sincerity blazing in his eyes and the gentle touch of his fingers against her skin. When it was her turn to speak, the words came from somewhere deep inside her, born of weeks of fear and hope and growing trust. "Kyle," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I came to you as a desperate mother, hiding behind lies and false identity because I believed that's what survival required. But you saw through my deceptions to the truth beneath. You could have destroyed me for my dishonesty, but instead you chose to protect not just me, but my children, offering us a place in your life and your kingdom." She paused, swallowing hard. "I thought I knew what love was, but you've shown me something deeper. You've given me not just safety but partnership. I vow to stand beside you, to trust in your strength while offering my own, and to build a future worthy of the faith you've placed in me." The priestess smiled as she bound their hands with silk cords, speaking the final words that would unite them, not just in the eyes of the kingdom, but in the ancient magic that governed their kind. Power hummed through the air, a tangible force that made Lyra's skin tingle as the bond settled into place between them. When Kyle kissed her, sealing their union, the crowd erupted in cheers. But Lyra was lost in the sensation of his lips against hers, in the rightness of being in his arms, in the knowledge that she was no longer alone in the world. As they broke apart, Elena and Thomas rushed forward, wrapping themselves around Lyra's skirts with excited laughter. Kyle's hand settled on Thomas's shoulder with surprising gentleness, while Elena beamed up at him with the fearless adoration only a child could offer. "Does this mean you're our father now?" Thomas asked with the blunt curiosity of youth. Kyle's expression softened in a way that made Lyra's heart skip. "If you'll have me," he said simply. Both children nodded enthusiastically, and as the crowd began to move toward the great hall for the feast, Lyra realized that somehow, impossibly, she had found everything she had never dared to hope for. Not just survival, but love. Not just safety, but belonging. Not just a future, but a family. The desperate mother who had thrown herself on the Alpha King's mercy was gone, replaced by a woman who finally understood her own worth.